Alright everybody, we are back for post-game coverage of the football game between the Elon University Phoenix and University of Richmond Spiders. So, before we begin, let me just begin to explain how crazy it was. It was crazy, and if you tuned into any of the football games throughout the entirety of the day today, they were good, but this one was great. And let me explain to you why. And so to go through some of the numbers here, the first quarter, Elon was ahead 14-7 with 2 first downs. Richmond had 6. All right, rushing and yardage rates was 6 for 25 for Richmond, 7 for 51 for Elon. Another big note was that the net passing yards was 138 for Richmond and 91 for Elon. The total offensive plays compared to the yardages were 24 for 163, 11 for 142. Possession of time for Richmond in the first quarter was 9 minutes and 9 seconds, where Elon's was 5 minutes and 51 seconds. Third down conversions for Richmond were 2 for 5, and then for Elon, 1 for 2. Red zone chances, both teams were 1 for 1. So, just right there alone, Elon was ahead, but I feel like Richmond really dominated the possession of the ball. They really kind of controlled areas where they needed to. So we move on to the second quarter. And in the second quarter, the score was tied 14-14. First downs, Richmond had 14, Elon had 3. Again, possession of ball, good ball handling on the offensive side for Richmond. Total offensive plays compared to the yardage rates was 51 and 288 for Richmond. For Elon, it was 22 and 167. Penalties for yards is a big thing to note that we'll talk about here in a little bit. For Richmond, it was 1 for 15. In Elon, they had 3 penalties for 20 yards. Possession of time, Richmond 19 minutes and 30 seconds, Elon 10 minutes and 30 seconds. Third down conversions, Richmond was 5 for 10, and Elon was 1 for 6. Red zone scores and chances, Richmond was 2 for 3, Elon was 1 for 1. So again, possession of ball. Richmond dominated the first half between the first and the second quarter for maintaining and controlling the ball. And honestly, I'm surprised the score at that point was only 14-14. I mean, it was really Richmond's game to have. They had the ball for such a long period of time. And so if you go to the third quarter, you really started hearing, for Elon, you really started hearing names like Jalen Hampton, Jackson Parham, and Bryson Daughtry. Up to the third quarter, Bryson Daughtry had 3 targets for 123 yards. The average yards per catch was 27. He had a 1 touchdown. Actually, funny enough, the very first touchdown of the game, which went for 74 yards. Early, Elon went up there, and all the quarterback did was throw a pass right to Bryson Daughtry and ran 74 yards down the field for the first score of the game. And so, even if you see somebody like Jalen Hampton, where his number's 10, he gained 62 yards, had a loss for 7, and net 55 yards overall. And then if you look at somebody else like Jackson Parham was targeted 9 times. He had 58 yards. Yards to catch was right around 16, and 1 touchdown, and his longest was 31 yards. And so, it's one of those things where we can start going in the game because the good thing I like about football and the good thing why football exists is that it's a story. It's a storybook, it's a playbook, and that's why obviously they use playbooks, because sports. So, if you go through the breakdown, overall, both teams had, wait for it, 11. They had so many possessions. So overall, in the overall regulation of things, they had, at least they had 11 drives. 11 drives, and then make that 13 drives overall, if you count in overtime, because that brings us to the point of the matter. So when they went into halftime, both teams were tied 14-14. In the second half, Richmond came back and kicked a field goal. Thankfully, it was just a field goal to make it 17-14. And throughout the entirety of the fourth quarter, I mean, neither team got anything done, right? On Elon's 11th drive, well, I should back up for a second. So at the very, very beginning of the fourth quarter, because the University of Richmond had it at the end of the third quarter and ran out the clock. So at the very beginning of the fourth quarter, Richmond punted it. They were forced to punt, get rid of it. So on Elon's 11th drive, towards, like I said, the beginning of the fourth quarter, they started from their own 1 yard line. Richmond had a holding and a pass interference call, which helped Elon gain momentum to get another first down. So they were essentially between second and third down. And of course, with the penalties, both penalties had a good amount of yardage to them, and therefore allowed Elon to really gain momentum in that swing. And it really could have been beneficial if they got points right there, right? Well, here we go. So eventually they did have to punt on that set of downs, but unfortunately they could have gotten points. They were getting close. But fortunately, we were able to stop Richmond on their 11th drive. We got the ball back. Number 83 had a major catch to attempt to tie the game, followed by a run by the quarterback McKay. He was really able to move those chains and really kind of keep the clock running at the right pace. Although the good thing about that as well is that we were on our side. We were right around field goal range. So that's the thing, is like we had a good set of downs going. We had good clock management going. But what about that field goal range? Well, here we go. There was a major run by number 34, like I said earlier, a name we heard of, the name of Jalen Hampton. Hampton was able to have a major run, which eventually tied up the deal to get us into field goal range. So that was big. But obviously the goal was a touchdown to win the game right there with about a little less than a minute left. And so we eventually made the field goal because we got forced into fourth down. Made the field goal with 37 seconds left within regulation to tie it up against Richmond. And then the craziest thing happened. So with just over 30 seconds left, Richmond got the ball back. We figured we're going in overtime, easy peasy. But 34 seconds in football is still a long time. And so what happened was they used good clock management as well, made a series of passes and runs where they were able to get out of bounds when they needed to. They still had a timeout left. And then, of course, we got a penalty. And penalty was the reason why so many things happened against Elon, right? It didn't go in Elon's favor. And again, 2 weeks ago, we had a home game, and it was the same thing where Elon couldn't control the penalties. They had numerous penalties that added up to several yards. They just didn't work out well. And so we had a penalty that brought them to pretty much field goal range, and we eventually forced them to a fourth down. And so it was getting interesting. So we had to make sure we kept them to 0 points. And so they propped up the field goal, and it misses. We were all sitting there shaking. My hands got really tense, and we went into overtime. 17-17 at the end of regulation, and we forced overtime. And so, first overtime, this is where the fun gets really going. And so, on the very first play of overtime, if you know how college football overtime works, this will make complete sense to you. On the very first play of overtime, we scored a touchdown on the first throw. And then Richmond came back, had a catch overturned, went to second down, and then eventually made second down. The QB ran for third down, and then eventually on one of the very last plays for third down, the quarterback on the Richmond Spiders got the done deal. So tied the game in overtime yet again. So at that point, tie ball game going into second overtime. In second overtime, Richmond was called for a holding, which became 2nd and 15. Pass was broken up, made it 3rd and 15 because Richmond got the ball first for the second overtime. That's kind of the way we opted to do things over at Elon for the second time around. And so eventually we forced them into 4th down, but they made the field goal. So here they are, up 3 points, and we need to respond. If we don't, we lose the game. And so right away, Elon scored the touchdown to make the score 30-27. So double overtime. Elon scores from being behind for most of the second half, and it was excitement all around. So many great things going on, and my voice is very tired, and so that's where I'm going to end it on a high note. And so this is Foul Ball Podcast reporting for the second home game over at Elon University for the Elon Phoenix.